Welcome to a wild card edition of the Steelers Breakdown podcast featuring PennLive Steelers beat reporter Nick Farabaugh, fresh from practice as the Steelers prepare to take on the arch rival Ravens down in Baltimore. As Tomlin said, this is a tax for the Steelers' collapse down the stretch in the season. They must hit the road instead of wear the crown as AFC North champions. It was looking like they would have that crown when they were 10-3. Now they're 10-7 and really fighting against a narrative of another rinse and repeat. This idea of a collapse down the stretch and then a one and done in the playoffs. And I know there's a lot of negativity in Steelers Nation. I mean, George Pickens looked like he was checked out in that game against the Bengals. Dan Moore was a turnstile. The offensive game plan to run it down the Bengals' throats needed to be dispensed with when they got from behind. They cannot play from behind under that game plan, but they did not change gears fast enough. Arthur Smith, there's a new drinking game in the 412 area code every time there's a pitch to a running back. I mean, it's getting ridiculous. Nick has sort of warned us about all this, but he also said that this team didn't necessarily fear going down to Baltimore to play the Ravens in the wild card round because, frankly, that was a strong possibility even heading into the Bengals game. So here we are. So what changes the narrative, Nick, so that and Tomlin addressed it. He said this is his baggage, the idea of these playoff losses, this string of playoff. It's not the team's baggage. It's not the player's baggage, but certainly it is baggage. What changes the narrative other than, so we're not in another offseason talking about the same stuff of another playoff swoon.
Yeah. I mean, John, it's rough right now. I do think there are a few positives to take away from that Cincinnati game. Most of them being on the defensive side of the football. They did hold Joe Burrow in that Cincinnati Bengals offense to 19 points. Even if they drove the ball, they won the time possession pretty handedly. They were only 2 of 5 in the red zone, 1 touchdown all game. I mean, that's pretty good, and that was the opening drive. So outside that opening drive, this defense played pretty well. But let's keep it real here. There are so many issues with the offensive side of the football right now that I think it's hard to go over all of them. But let me try to do this as much. One, Russell Wilson's play has just dropped off a cliff. I think that's a big part of this is they had a running game that was never that good. And I had talked about that way back when everybody, when the Steelers were still winning. And I said, listen, this run game hasn't really been good this year, but the pass game's been playing above its head. That pass game is no longer playing above its head. It's playing where you kind of thought it would. And Russell Wilson taking bad sacks, throwing picks, fumbling the ball. There's just a lot of things that Russ is not doing well now that he was doing well earlier in the year. The explosives have gone away. It's just not an explosive offense. It was an inconsistent but explosive offense. Now is a consistently bad offense on all fronts.
It's actually
Russell Wilson's play is a big part of that.
Explosive to implosive, almost. I mean, explosive to implode. I mean, they're blowing themselves up with these turnovers.
They are. And I think the biggest thing about this entire thing is there are two big things. I think one, Arthur Smith has called it terrible last few games. Again, I've never really been super impressed by Arthur Smith this year. I think a lot of his praise during the season was a little bit overrated. I thought Russell Wilson made a lot of plays that were not necessarily related to scheme. And I think we're seeing some of that really prop up now. I just don't love the run game schematics. I think that is a big part of their struggles in the run game. Too many free runners. And even if you like the schematics, they're a badly coached group. They miss guys when going to the second level. They run predictable schemes, so linebackers, safeties, corners, defensive linemen can hitch on it. It's really bad because it puts them essentially in a negative space right in the box. They're down one guy, or they can't get up to the second level to block this linebacker or whatever. It happens too much. Watch the tape. You'll see guys just flying through. This is not supposed to be how run games work. And here's where I think the biggest issue comes in. This offensive line has been banged up, and they have some weak points. And they're not a group that's going to maul you up front consistently across the board, but they are talented enough to be a pretty solid run game. The fact that they aren't is almost all directly related to scheme, but when you put all the rafters on them just moving guys out of the way, they're not going to do it. They're not good enough yet. The young guys are too young. Moore and Jones are struggling still. So these are issues. And so I think there's 5 big issues. 1, Russ's play. 2, Arthur Smith's play calling right. The first 10 first downs of the game, you run the ball. I mean, come on. You talk about the tosses. So many tosses. I don't think he makes a considerable effort to get his best playmakers the football enough. Granted, in this game, it didn't matter. George Pickens was dropping everything, but I don't think he consistently gets George Pickens the ball enough. He's finally starting to get Pat Freiermuth the ball a lot more, but it's come at the expense of George Pickens, which just 1 step forward, 2 steps back. Feature both of those players. I don't love the way he uses Najee Harris. I think Jaylen Warren has been kind of the one guy utilized correctly. But you have random Cordero Patterson snaps. Why are you pitching the ball to him with 4 minutes left on a potentially go-ahead touchdown drive? So personnel decisions, play calling, sequencing, bad. 3, these offensive tackles are just not very good pass protectors. And so you can't do a lot of pure drop back stuff. And Russ can't even really get through progressions from front side to back side. It's never really been his thing. So it's a mess there from the passing game, and the tackles are severely limiting it. 4, we talked about this all year. The wide receiving room is just not good enough. And then 5, the philosophy behind the offense itself doesn't work. It should work if you have all the pieces. The Steelers want to be the Ravens. They want to be the Eagles. They want to be the Lions. They're seeing these teams run the football, maul up front, have very efficient play action games, get big plays off play action. The Steelers are trying to be that. Here's the issue. The process by which they went to acquire that was completely wrong. And what I mean by that is Russell Wilson right now is kind of having to be the guy. He's kind of having to be the man. The offense kind of hitches on Russ being Russ and making some plays that he would make when he was 27 versus now when he's 36. He was just supposed to be more of a caretaker of an offense rather than the dude. And I think that's the big thing here is why Russ's weaknesses are being highlighted so heavily and why this offense is sputtering. Because if the Steelers had an elite run game, had a pretty consistent play action game going, Russ wouldn't have to necessarily step up all the time and make these unbelievable plays. And I think that's been the big part. When they built this offense, it was built with saying, okay, we're going to have an elite run game. We're going to have an efficient play action game. And neither of those things have happened. They're the worst play action team in the NFL this year. They are bottom 5 in all these rushing metrics that we've talked about, success rate, EPA per play, yards per carry. They're high in rush attempts, of course. But this offense, from a philosophical standpoint, the theory is correct. But the process by which they went about acquiring it was not. They actually are a much worse rushing team this year than they were last year. They were 9th, 10th, and 11th in those categories that I listed last year. So they were a pretty good run team actually last year, especially after Matt Canada got fired. They were a top 10 rushing team in the second half of last season, which was a big reason why they were able to put that little streak together at the end of the year where they went from 7-7 to 10-7 under Mason Rudolph. They were just running the ball at such a high level. So that is a big part of this issue is the Steelers have bad run game schematics and the run game's not churning. And because the run game's not churning, it puts obvious pressure on the wide receivers and Russell Wilson to make plays. And obviously that's not how this thing was designed. And so the design of the scheme itself doesn't work. And Arthur Smith has consistently been a bad run game schematics guy outside of the Derrick Henry years. The Derrick Henry years in Tennessee, obviously, one of the top rushing offenses. I think he was the best rushing offense the year before he went to Atlanta. But in Atlanta, consistently was a below average to maybe average rushing team his entire tenure there for those 3 years. He's never been a guru in that perspective. And so that has significantly hurt the Steelers. And until they kind of fix this run game, and I don't think it's going to happen this year, but this is significant to the offseason discussion too. Until this run game pops, you're going to have limitations of quarterback anyways. It doesn't really matter. And so you're going to have this run game pop. And right now, with that run game not popping, it puts extra pressure on Arthur Smith's pass game, the receivers, so guys like Pickens, Russell Wilson. And if they aren't playing above their heads, what happens is what you're seeing.
And that's a great point about building it wrong and structuring it wrong. And really, it goes back to when Mr. Rooney said after the one season, we want to run the ball better. So they go out and draft Najee Harris in the first round, which before they had an offensive line in place. You know what I mean? And, it seems like they've put the cart before the horse since day one in trying to rebuild this team. And then, of course, they get Andy Weald to come in who helped build the Eagles, and it was all built along the lines. And now they're in the process of trying to build both lines. And it just seems like it's in reverse. It's not happening the way it should happen in terms of the way you build a team. But let me ask you about one of those wide receivers, George Pickens, who seemed checked out, and like you said, dropping almost everything. And then there was some bizarre incidents caught on the TV on the sideline where he seemed to be engaging with a fan, and Pat Freiermuth was trying to calm him down. There was another shot of Russell Wilson going eyeball to eyeball with him, an inch away from each other's noses, trying to get his head back in the game, saying, you are basically the only receiver I've got. We need you in this game. And then Mike Tomlin was asked about some of this at the press conference and seemed not to know about it. What do you make of what's going on with George Pickens? Oh, and there's a video out by the Ravens. Some of their guys are sort of taunting him. They're trying on some cologne and they're giving it their reviews. And one of them says, "Well, it smells soft like George Pickens," something like that. So they think they can get into this guy's head and taunt him and make him do something, stupid, for lack of a better word, do something stupid during the game. So what's going on with him? I mean, some people are getting tired of it and saying we can't, you can't win with him. They're trying to write him off, when he's due for a major high dollar extension, right? I mean, he's in that year of his contract where he could be due some big bucks from the Steelers. So what's going on with him?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this before. George Pickens, such a talented football player. I mean, when he is on, he is a top 15 wide receiver in the NFL. He's hard to stop. He can run every route in the book. He can dunk on you down the field. He's great after the catch. There's so many different things that he can do when he's on. But when you see what happened on, Saturday, where he's dropping passes, he looks lackadaisical throughout the game. He has this habit of when he doesn't get involved early in games, just kind of the energy isn't there as much. We saw this against Dallas as well, where he didn't really have that, and then sometimes the antics follow, right? And that game, he pulls a guy down by his face mask at the end of the game. This one, he gets into it with fans. It's not great. So as a play caller, Arthur Smith, for example, I would be working to get George Pickens involved early every game. I mean, that keeps him focused, locked in, high energy. That's the type of player he is. When he gets fed the ball, he gets locked in. He becomes just a different player. So that's part of this. Is I think the Steelers just not giving him the ball as much as they should be. So I think he wants the ball in some respects. I think that's part of it. I also think we've just talked about this, how he's just a really up and down personality, right? He's just a guy that really is an emotional tide. He goes with the tides of his emotions. That's on and off the field. All of the things that we've heard about George Pickens are definitely true. And when he was coming out of Georgia, this was well known. It's not like the Steelers are surprised by what George Pickens is showcasing here. The difference is at Georgia, they were able to kind of quell Pickens through two things. One, they were winning a lot. That just helps. Two, more importantly, they did give George Pickens the ball early, even though they were a ball-dominant offense. They had very talented tight ends. They had very talented running backs. Pickens would get one or two targets early in the game, and he would be locked in the rest. And then he would make some crazy highlight reel catch later in the game. this was the George Pickens story, basically his entire career, George. And so that's what the Steelers need to do. They need to get the ball to him early because that's when he's locked in focus. Should you have to do that for a player? Probably not. But hey, that's how he works. And so you need to know your guy. And I think right now, to a degree, there's a lack of knowing your guy by the play calling perspective, I think. Getting George Pickens to be the first guy in the progression, getting him to be the main target on plays early, feeding him. I think that's what really needs to happen. And you feed him on multiple routes. Can't just be go balls all the time, slants, different things that you can get involved with. He can run different routes in the book. So there's a lot going on with George Pickens. I think, we've talked about the volatility of his game. It follows the volatility of his emotions. We know that this is an issue, and I don't think he's passed the test with flying colors. That's for sure, John. And so when the offseason comes, I think we have to have a deeper discussion about George Pickens and his future, especially because, again, he's going to want that big-time contract in the summer, and I'm not too sure the Steelers are going to be willing to tee that up for him. And if they aren't, I do wonder what happens. I don't know if he's going to play the Ayuk playbook or what's going to happen, but looking that far ahead, that could definitely be a possibility. And so you have to consider all those things, but he definitely is a guy that is more focused when he gets the ball early. And that's kind of how you have to manage it right now. You got to get him involved because it does keep him engaged and locked in and makes him a dangerous threat throughout the game. But I just don't feel like the Steelers have done that enough. So that's part of it. The other part is just the stuff you've seen since he's been drafted. The volatility of George Pickens is very real.
That's a great point, and something, if there is a way of placating what is is the issue with your player, I think you have to try to do it. And certainly the Steelers and Arthur Smith, who, by the way, is getting some calls about head coaching jobs. Can you believe it? But anyway, he should have done a better job placating that issue that you clearly have spotted. And maybe we're talking about a slightly different George Pickens, a guy with issues, but also immense talent. The situation the Steelers are in, they have not been this playoff starved since the days of the immaculate reception. That was the caught out of the air pass by Franco Harris 51 years ago by the late great Franco Harris. So what immaculate thing has to happen for this Steelers team with talent, yes, inconsistency in abundance. Dan Moore is now the weak link. Broderick Jones is kind of picking up his game on the offensive line. The running game, like you said, has been really an Arthur Smith mess scheme-wise. Defense can rattle Lamar Jackson and stymie him and confuse him and make him look anything but an MVP. It would be, this would be a sweet playoff victory to go down and mess up the Ravens season and the Steelers finally and Mike Tomlin really get off the schneid in this one and done playoff swoon that he's been on. So what immaculate thing needs to happen for the Steelers to do that?
The most immaculate thing of all, a fast start. That's what needs to happen. And that really is an immaculate thing because they have not gotten out to many fast starts this year. Certain fast starts that I can remember, they got out to a pretty fast start in the first Cincinnati game. Obviously, they won that one, 44-38. They got out to fast starts a little bit more earlier in the season. The Falcons game, they moved the ball pretty well. They got out pretty early in the Broncos and Chargers wins as well. When the Steelers get out the fast starts this year, and again, it's few and far between, when they have been able to get out the fast starts, they've been able to massage the clock and play ball control. They've been able to do that. That's what the Steelers want to do. They want to possess the ball, time of possession, be efficient. And getting out to a fast start is so big for that because you can't play down 10, 14, 13, whatever it has been. Look at the losses to Philadelphia, Kansas City, and Baltimore. I mean, all these games, the Steelers got down by multiple scores early. They clawed back in some of them. They even tied it up in Baltimore, of course, but they ended up losing those games because you cannot consistently get out these slow starts and just put yourself in a hole before the first quarter's even over. And I think that's been the key thing. And even their last few playoff games has been the same story. 21-0 last year in Buffalo. Kansas City, they did get out to a 7-0 lead, but they went down 35-7. Cleveland, they were down 21-0. Jacksonville, same thing, they were down. New England, same thing, they were down. So that has just been a theme of these games for Mike Tomlin recently. And if they can get out to a fast start, let's say they go, I can't believe I'm saying this, John, an opening drive touchdown. They are 0 of 17 on opening drives this year, getting a touchdown. That is insane to think about. Literally, the last opening drive touchdown they had was last year, Week 16 against the Bengals. Can they do it this week? If they do, they can get out to a quick start. They could score a touchdown the opening drive, suck the rest of the first half, and probably still be in the game. That's what I mean, you know? You get out to a quick start. You give yourself room for error. You give yourself margin of error. The Steelers just have not had large margins of error in any of these games. And so getting out to a fast start where you're not clawing back from a deep deficit is going to be so huge, because each of the last 4 games, that has been the story. They got down 10-0 to Cincinnati even, right? And that is a significant part of that. And so I can think of some earlier games this year. Even the first Ravens game, the Steelers controlled that game for the entire first half. They really did. They controlled that game for most of the day, and that was able to kind of buoy them, even when the Ravens kind of started to get going a little bit at the end of the first half. Then at the end of the game, the Steelers were able to kind of keep themselves afloat just because they got out to a nice start and were up 9-3, I think, at half. So fast start offensively, I think, would help. A touchdown would help tremendously in the first quarter. Of course, the Steelers are the worst first half offense and the worst first half offense and the worst first quarter defense in the NFL. So that is why they are down. They have consistently been down, even in some of their wins. Washington comes to mind, where they were down 24-14 at one point. Steelers need to be up in this game early so they can play their game. I think that's going to be the big thing. If they can get up early and they can start to play some ball control, start to run the ball a little bit, massage the clock, that will be where they can go. That's their formula for victory, because I think the defense can hold up. But the defense isn't going to hold up if you're throwing them out on the field every drive. They're not going to hold up all the time if you're able to do that. So if you're able to keep drives sustained and just continue to drive the ball and not go 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out, I think that can be a formula for a win. So you're going to have to essentially bring the Ravens down into the mud with you. Like we have talked about so many times, how do the Steelers win this game? They get in the mud and they play dirty. That's how you do it. You play ugly. You don't play sexy. It doesn't need to be flashy. You are not, the Kansas City Chiefs. You are not the Buffalo Bills. You are the Steelers, and you have to win with your identity. And the Steelers have a clear identity. That's what's going to have to happen. And I think a fast start's going to be big to that. If you can get a touchdown, a turnover, something early in the game that gives you a spark and gets you out to a quick lead, that would be a huge, huge boost to the Steelers.
Well, all they have to do is shuck off their tendency over to the 2024 season, basically become a new you, like everybody's trying to do in the new year. We're all trying to be a new you. So the Steelers got to be a new version of themselves and break that tendency of the slow start and the 0 for 17 scoring on that opening drive. So let's see if they can do it. And let's face it, in that ugly, mucky game, if the Steelers can drag the Ravens down, all the pressure is going to be felt by Lamar Jackson and those Ravens, because Vegas has installed them in an 8.5, 9-point favorite. The whole national media has written off the Steelers that we're the worst team in the playoffs. We get the Ravens and Lamar Jackson down in the mud with us. Man, I would like to see how they play with all the pressure on them, because I think Lamar could be prone to some mistakes in that scenario. So let's hope it works. 2 other players that I want you to talk about in terms of what they could bring to this game. And then let's run down the injuries on both sides, because I think both sides, especially, uh, uh, their number one receiver could be an interesting scenario. But the two players I'm interested in for this game is Mike Williams, because we've not seen a whole lot of him, but he has that big play potential with Russell Wilson, and of course Justin Fields. Not to say that Justin Fields would be the starter. That's not going to happen, even though there's a lot of people in Pittsburgh want to go back to him as the starter. But those packages that we were supposed to be seeing, we saw some, and then we didn't see any. What's going on with both of those scenarios, and then touch on those injuries.
Yeah, I think Mike Williams, man, it's just I don't get it, but I think he's kind of just done. Athletically, he is. He can still go up and get the ball, and make those contested grabs. So whenever you are in a situation where you want to see that, you can. I just think that's what the Steelers view him as. He's just a jump ball specialist, and I don't think they really view him as much more than that. Now, maybe you can say that's more than what you trust in Van Jefferson. I wouldn't blame you for saying that, but I just think at this point that's got to be what it is. They haven't really liked what they've seen in practice. He really hasn't been anything more than that, and that's why at this point he is just kind of that guy. He's not necessarily someone that is going to consistently route someone up or be a consistent top wide receiver in this league anymore. And so we'll see. I know Mike Tomlin said again that maybe he'll have a bigger role, but he's been saying that for 2 months. So we'll see. I think the wide receiver room, it needs an infusion of playmaking. I think Mike Williams is your best chance to get that out of the guys that haven't been mainly in the deep rotation. I would like to see him play more, especially against the Ravens. The Ravens play a lot of man. I think you could see jump ball chances to Mike Williams, so I would like to see that. So we'll see. Injury wise though, John, they are not banged up too much. Mason McCormick and Dante Jackson are the two big ones. Jackson has that back injury, obviously, that's just been bothering him for the month. Just 2 out of the last 3 games. Pinch a nerve in his lower back. It's obviously very painful. And he can basically re-injure it anytime he twists, turns, anything. So it's very easy to re-injure that back. But he was a full participant today. So that's, to me, pretty good sign he's going to go. I'm interested to see how they do game day inactives. I don't know if they'd sit Pierre. Trice has obviously been the starter without Jackson. And I think that's kind of interesting to explore. If Jackson, because he is so exposed to potentially re-injuring this back injury, do you try to get Trice in there? Do you sit Pierre and maybe not care as much about special teams? I think that's significant to think about. And then Mason McCormick has that broken left hand, which is, man, the Steelers' offensive line this year. I know this was a big early season talking point. They've been pretty healthy since James Daniels went down, but Nate Herbig, Fautanu, and James Daniels all out for the year. Now McCormick hurt. They'd be down to their 4th string right guard. It would be Spencer Anderson, which also complicates things because Spencer Anderson's the swing tackle because they only have 2 true tackles on the roster right now. So McCormick potentially missing the game with a broken hand would be significant. Now, McCormick did say that they're going to fit him with a brace. It's going to be heavily taped, not wearing a cast. If he can grip well, if he can play with good functional strength, he will play. So we'll see. It's going to all kind of come down to how well he can function. If he can function well, he'll be out there. If he can't, it'll be Spencer Anderson. And so that's a tough blow because I think McCormick has played really well over the last few weeks. And really ever since he came in, I think he's played really well and been a nice stabilizing force for the Steelers. So we'll see if he can play with that hand injury. But that's going to be something to watch. Outside of that, I'm not sure we're going to see any IR activations. Like I don't think you're going to see a Cole Holcomb, a Roman Wilson, a Logan Lee come off injured reserve. So I think those guys are still a little out. But we'll see. McCormick's going to be the big one to watch to me because I think offensive line shuffling, particularly in the stage of the season where the Steelers are at and how much they struggled with some of the things on the offensive line, is significant.
What about Zay Flowers and the Ravens? How are they looking for this game?
Yeah, Flowers, doesn't sound like he's going to play. It doesn't seem like they're very optimistic about it. And so the injuries to Flowers, it sounds like it's a sprain. He's week to week. I imagine that that's an injury that looks like, okay, he could return after this game, but not for this one specifically. And so obviously that would be a significant loss for the Ravens. Now the Ravens aren't super banged up otherwise. Actually, they're pretty healthy for the most part. They'll get some guys back. Returner Deontay Hardy's probably going to be back. So we will see, but they're a pretty healthy team overall, outside of Flowers. But Flowers is a big loss because it changes what the Steelers can do with their corners. They could probably feel a little bit more comfortable playing man-to-man, which I think is actually pretty significant for Pittsburgh because they can put Porter on Bateman. And outside of that, you could probably trust Jackson or Trice on whoever else, whether it's Tyler Wallace, Nelson Aguilar, etc. So it changes what the Steelers can do, and it also changes the run game schematics. They don't have to say play as late of a box as they usually do. They can theoretically come down and stack the box a little bit just because most of the players that you're going to see are going to be tight ends or Derrick Henry. So I think it does hurt the passing game for Baltimore a little bit if they don't have Zay Flowers.
And give me your impressions of Justin Fields figuring in this game, and then how your feeling on how this game could unfold.
Well, I do think we're going to see Justin Fields. I think we're going to see some of the Justin Fields package. I think that they have some wrinkles of that package that they haven't pulled out just yet. And I think that they will try and pull those out this week. So I do expect to see him a little bit, especially with Russ struggling. They just need something to hit the spark on this offense a little bit. And right now, Russ just hasn't been able to give them that spark. So maybe a big play with Fields in there and the package could. So I do expect to see him this week. And listen, I expect this game, I do expect the defense to be able to hunker down a little bit. I think the Steelers defense took the right strides. I think they do have unique personnel to be able to slow down this offense. I don't think they're going to be able to slow them down like they did the first time at home. But I do think they'll be able to keep them at bay. So I don't think they're going to be able to kind of blow out the Steelers, specifically right away. I could definitely see them winning by double digits, though. I think it's going to be closer than people think. I think people expect this to be like 38-10 or something crazy. I think it's probably going to be something like, think like 27-16, 28-17, something like that, where maybe they get a late touchdown pull away. So that's kind of how I see this playing out, where the defense is going to be stingy enough, but they'll pull away eventually, start to kind of crack through. I just don't trust the Steelers' offense to really keep up with the Ravens' offense right now.
Hey, and why would anyone? Because, I mean, the evidence it has been submitted, over 17 games, and we have that 0 for 17 first drive failure rate. There's no reason to feel optimistic going down to Baltimore. The tax for losing the division and blowing a 10-3 record at the time. There is no reason to feel optimistic, but there's nothing I like better than beating the Ravens, and secretly I just think it would be so poetic to have this victory be the one that shatters the rinse and repeat narrative that we've been suffering under all these past years, and I'm just sick of hearing about it and talking about it. So if it's going to happen, let it be the Ravens to break the trend and see the Steelers do something immaculate that reestablishes them as a legitimate playoff team. And we can hope, right? It's 0-0. It's playoffs. Anything can happen. So we'll see. I just was that point spread blew my mind, because this is typically even when the Steelers with Kenny Pickett, it was always a 3-point nip and tuck game. That point spread blew my mind, but that's the state of the Steelers that are going into this game. Let's see how they come out of this game next week, and we'll be talking about it here on your Steelers Breakdown podcast. Let's hope we're still talking about an upcoming game, because that means that the Steelers playoff life has been extended by some immaculate miracle down in Charm City. We shall see. Be with us next Tuesday on the Steelers Breakdown podcast. And until then, go Steelers.